Okay, sounds good. I'm Moataz Soliman. I'm the co-founder and CTO here at Instabug. And today I'm going to talk to you about how you could monitor the performance of your mobile apps beyond just doing the basic stuff. But before we get into this, let me just give you a very quick brief about what we do at Instabug. So at Instabug, we work with more than 25,000 companies to help them with monitoring and enhancing their performance of their mobile applications. We do that through our three main products, which is what we call bug reporting, crash reporting, and performance monitoring. But like when we started to work on Instabug, we didn't start with those kind of products. That kind of product evolvement that happened, it happened by the evolvement that we were seeing in the ecosystem. So just a quick history. So 10 years ago, performance of the mobile apps meant only one thing. It was only crash-free rate. It was the only thing that everyone was monitoring. It was the only thing that every company cared about. It was impossible to achieve any App Store rating or to enhance the reach of your app if you're not focusing on the App Store rating and on your crash-free sessions. And crash-free sessions would have been okay at like 90% crash-free rate. Now everything has changed. So when we get to look at this right now, like you will see that many things change throughout the market. So user expectations are very different, operating systems are very different, competition is very different, and the app stores are very different. Let me just give you a quick example. So on the user expectation side, while this could have been an okay experience in which like users could be okay with like a spinner that is spinning inside the app most of the time, now this is just too slow. No one is going to wait for that. While previously it would have been okay if like your app was consuming a lot of battery. Right now, like if your app is consuming a lot of battery, actually 36% of your users are going to stop using it immediately. Same thing with the app stability. So if the app wasn't stable or if the app wasn't performing well, as long as it was doing the main functionality, users were fine with that, and they were a lot more forgiving than they are today. Right now, like if that's the case, 80% of your users are going to delete the app on the first day if they are encountering any crashes within the app. So there is basically a very low tolerance within mobile app users in general. And accordingly, the operating systems are reacting as well. So while previously the operating system would have been okay with like an app that is using a lot of memory, a lot of battery, or a lot of CPU, right now the operating system is going to proactively terminate the app if it isn't performing as expected. And that's because there are a lot more alternatives than it used to be before. So while previously there were like 500,000 apps in the App Store that were active, right now there is at least 10x that. So basically, if your app isn't performing, the competition is just a simple click away so that like customers can easily go to the other app. And the same thing happens with customer acquisition. So while previously it would have been okay for you to like to shoot for like ranking very high on the App Store rating for a specific keyword, because like basically the App Store was like the way the App Store was doing the App Store the App Store search ranking was only based on a couple of parameters. So everyone was using the same things, and everyone was using those very long names of explaining everything that the app does in the title of the app to optimize for App Store. For App Store rating. Right now, the App Stores are now using a lot more parameters to decide whether your app should be featured on the App Store or not, or whether it should be ranking high on the App Store search optimizations or not. And it's interesting that many of these parameters are very technical parameters. So when you look at these are like app hangs, latencies, user resource usage, and the app footprint. So basically what we can get out of this is that performance is now heavily impacting your business. So that's why we started to think about the products differently, and that's why we started to think more about the how can we help our customers improving their performance of the apps. So basically in 2022, app quality couldn't be just the stability or the crash-free sessions. It has to be the performance of the app as well as the app stability. So the way that we currently define this is that we have a few metrics that we decide the performance and the stability of the app based on. We've got the app launch, the screen loading, the UI responsiveness, the network performance, as well as the stability metrics of the crashes and the fatal hangs. And in order to say that like a new build that you just shipped is actually viable for customers to start using, and you should be rolling it out to more users on production, you need to make sure that you're tracking these metrics consistently. So let's start with app launch. Very quickly, like the way that you define app launch is that it is the time that it takes for your app to start to become responsive. It is definitely very important because it is the first impression that customers take about the app, and it heavily impacts the App Store search optimization. And the way that we classify this is that we classify the app launch into 3 different types. There is the cold app launch, the warm app launch, and the hot app launch. The difference between these is based on how many stages the app needs to go through for it to start to become interactive. So while companies might be using this definition of the cold app launch, the warm app launch, and the hot app launch to define the latency of their app launch, we take that even a step further by measuring the total perceived time of an app launch. So this is something that many customers are now starting to use as their way of defining the app launch. It isn't only the time that the OS needs for the rendering or for loading the app. It also is the time that the app uses to fetch any extra details, whether it is from the disk or from the network, for your app to start to become interactive. And this is what we call the time to interactive, or TTI. So we always make sure that what we've noticed from our customers is that the best practices is to measure both as your latency for the app launch. And if you'd like to look at some benchmarks, Android Vitals provides that. So Android Vitals provides some, these are the thresholds that you shouldn't ever cross when it comes to your different types of app launches. Because once you start to cross that, this is going to impact your App Store search results. So for cold app launch, it shouldn't cross 5 seconds. For warm app launch, it shouldn't cross 2 seconds. And for hot app launch, it shouldn't cross 1.5 seconds. Then there are a few tips that we've seen that companies might use to be able to enhance their App Store, their app launch. Let me just go through a few ones of these. So the first one is monitoring the latency and making sure that you're monitoring the right thing. So as I was just mentioning, you need to make sure that you're not just monitoring the stages that the OS or the activities or the fragments take to render. You need to make sure that you're actually monitoring the whole time that the app takes for it to start to become interactive. What you then need to do is that you need to break that down into different phases, and you need to make sure that this definitely helps you a lot to figure out where exactly the problem is happening. So for example, if there is a specific stage that is causing the most latency, or if there is a regression in a specific stage, you will be able to point this out very quickly, and you will be able to solve the problem much faster. Then you need to make sure that you're moving any expensive tasks or reducing any network calls that you're doing during the app launch. And finally, you need to make sure that you're using a baseline profile so that in that case, you can make sure that you're optimizing the most critical paths inside the app. So that could be the app launch, or later on, if there is any specific flows inside the app that you want to make sure that it is completely optimized. Next is screen loading. So the way that we define screen loading, it is the same as the app launch, but we just apply that to all of the screens within the app. So it's basically the same time that the app takes for it to start every single screen inside your app. However, we're defining it into 2 buckets as well. So there is the time that the activities and the fragments need to render, and there is the time that you need to do for fetching any details, whether it is from the disk or over the network. And you need to make sure that you're defining both, and you need to make sure that you're measuring both parts of the screen loading. Some benchmarks about that as well. Android Vitals provide us is that 0.5 seconds is the maximum that you would have for the initial view rendering, 1 second for the content loading, and 1.5 seconds for the total screen loading. Third is UI responsiveness. And the way that we define UI responsiveness, this is the time that this is basically the UI performance within every screen. So within every screen, this is how fast your UI is rendering. So the way that this works is that in most of most of the devices are running on 60 frames per second. So what that means is that the frame needs to be rendered in less than 16.67 milliseconds. So if that isn't the case, this is what is called a UI jank. So what happens then is that if a frame takes more than 16.67 milliseconds to render, what happens then is that the OS starts to skip frames. So that's when a user starts to feel that there is something, like there is a stutter or there is something wrong while using the app. This is when the app starts to feel slow, and this is when you start to get like the support tickets of like people complaining about like the app is being slow. And this is like when most of the customers are complaining about the app being slow, this is what they mean, when the app is skipping frames. So you need to make sure that you're like you need to make sure that like none of the frames inside your app is rendering in more than 16.67 milliseconds. Common sources of UI janks is crawlable lists, layout and rendering issues, thread scheduling delays, and object allocation and garbage collection. So you need to make sure that like these things you need to basically test for each one of these. So a couple of tips about how you can improve the UI responsiveness. First is making sure that you're inspecting any frame that is being rendered in more than 16.67 milliseconds. And the way that we do that is that we're consistently tracking the performance of the UI render loop, and we make sure that like if there is any frame that is taking more than 16.67, we report that so that you can look into what is the cause of those issues. Second, like you need to make sure that you're pushing any long tasks, whether it is any calculation or any logic that you're doing on the client side, or if there is any disk access during the render loop, you need to make sure that you're offloading that to a separate thread. And finally, you need to make sure that you have enough automated stress tests specifically for the scrollable views, because that's where like most of the issues with UI janks happen. Fourth is client-side network monitoring. And we break that down into two things. We break it down into network failures and network latencies. And what's interesting is that we've seen that most of the companies, they do have very solid processes for monitoring server-side network performance. However, most of the companies, they don't have enough monitoring on the client side. And the problem with that is that this is missing a lot of details. So let's take network failures, for example. On the network failure side, server-side monitoring doesn't count for some failures that could be happening with the users. So while your server-side monitoring might be reporting 4 or 5 nines uptime and like everything is green, users might be seeing something different. And that's because client-side timeouts and cloud-side failures might not be counted on your server-side monitoring. And the problem with that could be because like a device is connected to a poor network connection or something, and like the network is consistently dropping. In that case, like the customers might be seeing something completely different from what you're reporting on your dashboards on the server-side monitoring. So you need to make sure that you're measuring both. Same thing when it comes to latency. So the server-side monitoring, it doesn't count for the payload latencies and geolocation latencies. So it doesn't count for like the time that it takes for the upstream and the downstream of the data during the network request, as well as like if there is a specific geolocation that is further from where that your servers are physically located. And this is something that you won't get if you're only relying on server-side monitoring. Some best practices that we've seen companies adopt for optimizing the network performance is, one, identifying the key requests, making sure that you're like, these are the key requests that you're marking within the app to make sure that you're optimizing the ones that are most relevant to you. Second is splitting the big requests, making sure that you're splitting those requests into smaller ones, specifically if they are on a critical path. So if there is a specific request that is being executed on like during some initial phase of the app launch, you need to make sure that you're optimizing that. You're not sending any extra data, you're not requesting any extra data. Next, you need to make sure that you're applying compression algorithms on the client side and the server side to make sure that you're optimizing the payload size. And finally, using CDNs if you're expecting customers to be in specific geolocations. So if you're expecting customers from a specific place on the world, you need to make sure that like, you have edge locations that are closer to your customers. That's on the performance side. Then on the stability side, like these are most of the metrics that we were aware of and like we're pretty used to, which is like the crash-free sessions. And the way that we define the crash, there are the different types of crashes. There is if the app is doing any invalid operation, or if there is a problem that caused the OS to terminate the app. And we classify those into three types of crashes. There is the app launch crash, which is like the most critical. There is the foreground crash, which is also very critical, and the background crashes, which is like they're all very important, but like they're with various levels of urgency. And finally, the fatal hangs and ANRs. And ANRs, that's when the app is, like the UI performance of the app is too slow, that it reaches 5 seconds, and that's when the OS starts to flag it to your customers that there is something wrong with the app, and like it asks them to whether to terminate the app or not. And the benchmarks on this is that you should be shooting for no more than 0.47% of your sessions to experience an ANR. So now that we've went through these metrics, what you need to make sure of, you need to make sure that like with every new release that you're putting out, you need to make sure that you're tracking all of these metrics. The problem is that like you need to make sure that you have like a single metric that encapsulates all of these metrics into one. And that's why we have, what we've seen is that it is always to have like a single metric that encapsulates all of that. And that's why we've added a metric called the app abdex. And the way that this works is that it is a score from 0 to 1 that shows the overall health of any new build that you're putting out. The way that this works is that we're basically looking into every session that your app is experiencing, and we're classifying it into 4 different buckets. There is the satisfying sessions, the tolerable sessions, the frustrating sessions, and the crashing sessions. And based on this, we define like how good the number of sessions that are satisfying or tolerable versus the ones that are not. So we basically calculate the app abdex by dividing the satisfying and tolerable sessions divided by the total number of sessions that you have in the app. What this does is that it gives you a single metric that you can decide the stability of any new build that you're putting out based on. So, so whenever you have a new build that you're putting out, you need to make sure that you're checking the app abdex of that specific build. So if you're doing a gradual rollout, you need to make sure that you're tracking this app abdex before deciding whether to roll that out to 100% of your users or to roll that back and to do any extra fixes that you have. And it's also very useful for measuring the performance of your team over time. So in that case, you can able to see that like if the app abdex is starting to dip down like below 0.7 or something, then maybe that's the time that you need to like pause feature development and start to allocate more cycles for enhancing the app performance, while making sure that like whatever enhancements that you're going to do for the app performance are going to be things that the users are going to actually feel, because you're actually you're fixing issues that they're actually perceiving while using the app. So that's it for me. If you're interested in any more tips about like how you can enhance any of these metrics, we have a lot of tips and we've wrote a lot of content about that on our blog. So if you want to check that, you can check that on our blog, or we have our booth here as well. So if you have any questions about how you can enhance any of these metrics that we talked about, please come and talk to us over there. And yeah, that's it. And if you have any questions.